Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk to you today about lessons 14.3 and 14.4, culture and environmentalism. I'm going to make two short videos, and so I'll try to get it all on QuickTime Player, so I don't have to go through YouTube, a little easier. But anyway, the counterculture is the first note. It's such a unique time in U.S. history. We've already seen counterculture with the Beats in the 50s. And so, what the counterculture was in the 60s, um, they called themselves the hippies. Um, it was mostly white middle class people disillusioned with the war in Vietnam um, and with the injustices in America. They tried to establish a society based on love and peace. You know, so many of their things aren't wrong. Uh, Hippies are kind of looked at as a strange group today. You may have a hippie in your family; they're still around. Um, their time was short-lived, but the legacy lingers. The freedoms and expressionism that they brought about in their era. Um, Timothy Leary, if you had a spokesman for hippies, was kind of their spokesman. If you could have a spokesman of a counterculture, he was a Harvard professor. And I hate to advocate drug use, and I'm not advocating drug use, but he was really into LSD, and that was kind of the drug of the '60s. Tune in, turn on, and drop out was his quote. Never using mind expanding experiences. A lot of Zen Buddhism, a lot of Native American ideas, meditation. If there was one capital city of the hippie movement, it was San Francisco, and especially the Haight-Ashbury district. So we've already seen San Francisco being part of the beat counterculture, so this isn't too unique. It's a great city. It's a beautiful city in our state, and if you haven't been there, I hope you get a chance. The counterculture of the 60s. Our second note is pop art. You know, you've all been to swap meets and flea markets, and you've seen the Campbell soup cans, you've seen the Marilyn Monroe pictures. Kind of a unique art form developed in the late 50s. Um, it's commercial art. Bright, simple images brought to everyday life. Commercial images like the Campbell soup can. Mass culture items. They used advertising. It tried to blur the lines between high art and everyday culture. And it's still around. Pop art is still around. If there's one guy who's on the tab, Andy Warhol. He's the one who really brought it home. He's the one who made a lot of money from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His museum is the largest museum for a single artist in the world, Andy Warhol. And our second note is pop art. Okay, our third note is rock music in the 60s. Now, we saw how rock music really got going in the 50s and late 40s, but it's the 60s that really embraces rock music, and it became the anthem of the protest for the people in the 60s, unhappy with the government, unhappy with American society. The Beatles emerged in 1964. They led what's called the British invasion of rock, and their influence is incredible. Rock emerged as an international electronic music form, and towards the end of the decade, it really morphed, as well as the counterculture, to really embrace a protest attitude. Now, Woodstock was the crowning moment, not only of rock music in the 60s, but of the generation that called themselves the counterculture. A 4-day music festival in upstate New York. Your book says 400,000 people attended, but they really don't know because so many people just broke through the lines. Largely peaceful. And like I said, most people consider it the defining moment of the 60s and the hippies generation. Now, the last note, towards the end of the decade, rock really changed, and a lot of, the heavy metal things you might think about, it really took over folk singers, protest folk singers, like Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, famous musicians creating their music to protest American inequalities and the Vietnam War. So rock music really morphed in the '60s. If you can think about it, beginning with Elvis and uh, and even the early Beatles songs, "I Want to Hold Your Hand," to anti-war songs. So rock music and the counterculture really changed in the 1960s. Okay, my fourth note is the conservative response. The USA was angry. Mainstream America was angry that these hippies were so uninhibited in their self expression, taking their clothes off, lack of rational thought, not having any sense of right or wrong. So there was a real anger among what you might call mainstream America. They were questioning whether the young people in the '60s really could tell right from wrong. And it was growing. It was growing. Um, and It propelled Richard Nixon to the presidency. The history of Richard Nixon, we've already seen him with the House of Un-American Activities Committee. We've seen him with losing the election of 1960. And now he emerges as the Republican candidate and the Republican winner for the presidency in 1968. You can kind of see how this would happen. The freedoms of hippiedom, the freedoms of rock music, the freedoms that are going on around our country. San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury, and a conservative response is going to develop. And that's what happened towards the end of the '60s politically, and morally, I think. Morally. Okay, my last note for this video is environmentalism. This is such a unique section, and I'm not a total Greenpeace, environmental, Green New Deal, but we all need to be very concerned with environmentalism. It's the widespread realization that pollution and overconsumption are threatening our environment. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring is really the beginning. She's obviously on the test, and it brought to light not only the dangers of pesticide, but the dangers of polluting our environment. Okay, I'm going to stop this one, and then I'll make another short video, and that'll be our fifth note with environmentalism.